Hello, and welcome to our webinar on effective advocacy, understanding the basics of Idaho's legislative process. My name is Justin Ruen, and I'm a policy analyst with the Association of Idaho Cities, and I'm going to be your guide on this whirlwind tour of the Idaho legislature and the legislative process. I've been involved with the Idaho legislature for almost 20 years in terms of my nearly 15 years of service with AIC, as well as serving in the House of Representatives and as an intern when I was in college. So I know a lot about the process, and the purpose of this webinar today is really to provide city elected officials and staff with some helpful information on how the process works and some of the issues that cities will be facing in this 2016 Idaho legislature, so that cities really can be, city officials can be effective advocates and participate effectively in that process. So with that, we'll start off by talking a little bit about the first great opportunity that city officials have this session to interact with their legislators, and this is the annual City Officials Day at the Capitol, which this year is on Thursday, January 28th. And we really look forward to seeing all of the city officials who come to Boise for the annual Day at the Capitol, and it's a great event. We will start in the morning with a legislative briefing at the Boise Center Summit Auditorium. We're going to hear from Idaho Lieutenant Governor Brad Little, who will talk about some hot topics. We will also have a panel of legislators that will be moderated by Dr. Jim Weatherby. And that panel will include Senate President Pro Tem Brent Hill of Rexburg, House Local Government Committee Chair Representative Lynn Luker of Boise, and Representative Rick Youngblood of Nampa. After that, the meeting will break shortly before noon to allow city officials to either walk or take the shuttle over to the Capitol and meet their legislators outside of the House and Senate chambers on the third floor, and then escort them to lunch back at the Boise Center in the Eagles Room, which will be at about noon. After lunch in the afternoon, city officials can take part in tours of the Capitol. You can watch legislative committee meetings, and also city officials can schedule private meetings with legislators or state agency staff. A good tip is to make sure that you call your legislators before the meeting and let them know that you will be in town and make arrangements to meet them for lunch. Because there are so many people at the lunch, it can be difficult for city officials to connect with legislators at the Boise Center in the lunchroom. So it's a good idea to go over to the Capitol and wait to meet them outside of the House or Senate chambers. So when the House and Senate break, you can actually meet them there and escort them, either walk or take the shuttle bus that we'll provide over to the Boise Center. This is a great event, and we always look forward to seeing hundreds of city officials in attendance. We'll talk a little bit about what we will cover in today's webinar, including AIC's role in legislative advocacy, basics of the Idaho legislature, legislative leadership and party officials, the role of legislative committees. We'll discuss how a bill becomes a law using House Bill 102 from the 2015 legislative session as a case study. We'll cover some tips for communicating with legislators, and then finally issues that cities face in the 2016 Idaho legislature. AIC really plays an important role in advocating on behalf of the interests of Idaho's 200 incorporated cities. And so it's been really through AIC's leadership that cities have protected their ability to grow through annexation, that we've advocated for increased transportation revenue, for local governments to spend on their streets, that we have protected urban renewal as a tool for economic development, and that we've passed a very important local government purchasing law. These are all really important AIC policy initiatives, and they have happened not just through the efforts of AIC's staff, but through the grassroots engagement of city officials throughout the state who have advocated on behalf of the interests of cities. AIC's mission statement specifically calls out our role as advocates. Our mission is to promote excellence in and advocate for city governance, community leadership, and services to citizens in order to strengthen Idaho cities. AIC's involvement with legislative advocacy includes researching and drafting legislation for the benefit of cities, monitoring all legislative proposals that affect cities, communicating important legislative information to city officials, organizing city officials for a united response to support or oppose legislation, analyzing how legislative proposals would impact cities, and advocating in the interests of cities to legislators. AIC's policy priorities are set by the Board of Directors and the AIC Legislative Committee. And these groups include elected city officials representing every area of the state. The AIC Legislative Committee is supported by several technical analysis teams. And these teams bring together a wealth of knowledge and expertise to examine the impact of several hundred bills each legislative session. There are 8 technical analysis teams, including administrative and fiscal officials, city attorneys, building officials, city clerks, fire chiefs, planners, police chiefs, and public works officials. And we greatly appreciate the work that these folks do in reviewing bills and responding with the impact that they see that legislation will have on cities. We really couldn't do our advocacy without the work that these people do, and we need to give them credit for their efforts. It's greatly appreciated. The success of AIC's legislative advocacy efforts really depends on the grassroots engagement of city officials throughout the state. So what role do city officials play in advocacy? It's important for city officials to build relationships with legislators. And this really happens not just when the session is going, but over what's called the interim. Over the summer months when the legislature is not in session, you can meet with legislators, build relationships so that they know you, and when the session is going, then you can call them or they can call you, and you will be a resource for legislators. That's great, and it's very helpful to our efforts. We also urge city officials to contact legislators to support or oppose bills. During the legislative session, you will get several AIC legislative alerts asking you to contact legislators in either the House or the Senate or on a particular committee to support or oppose legislation. And so these efforts really are important in convincing legislators that folks in their district think that these issues matter, and help them to take a more informed position on the legislation that they're voting on. It's also important for particularly elected officials to coordinate with local stakeholders, particularly those in local government, chambers of commerce, civic groups, and other groups that have an interest or a stake in legislative proposals. Bringing together local coalitions can be a very powerful thing, and it can really help our legislative advocacy efforts to have other folks engaged at the local level.